Welcome to those of you who are with us online. Glad to have you.
Yes.
So what is that?
Apple IIe computer.
Apple II Plus.
Oh, 2 Plus?
That was my first computer. Marvelous machine. Cost more than one today that can do many, many times more powerful. If I remember, I paid like $2,000 for that. And this is back when? Early 80s?
84, 85.
Yeah.
Floppy drive.
Didn't have a hard drive at all, no. It came with one maybe, or maybe you had to buy it extra, I'm not sure. And if you remember those of you who are my age, everything was on a floppy disk, right? A little 4x5 plastic flimsy thing. So if you wanted to do a letter or anything, Word document of any kind, you put the floppy disk in, you loaded it onto the computer, you took the floppy disk out. If you wanted to save it, you put another blank formatted floppy disk in that could save it to it. As it sits there, assuming that the floppy disks haven't been used and it's just sitting there, what can you do with it? It's a little bit bulky for a paperweight. I mean, you could use it for a paperweight, but it would be awkward. I guess if you were in a small enough boat in a small enough lake, you could maybe use it for a boat anchor. Probably not a very good one. What makes it useful? Program. What's a program? What's a program? The whole dumb machine, and it's a dumb machine, the whole thing works off of ones and zeros. That's all it is. They call it binary code, right? And if it's a 1, electricity does one thing. If it's a 0, electricity does another thing. It's either open or closed. And everything it does is dependent on that 1 and 0 and the electricity that flows through it. When they first came out, I thought, well, you know, it looks like these things may be around for a while. Maybe I'll learn a little bit about it. So I went back to Lamar University at Beaumont and took some classes. I took machine language, which is dealing with binary code directly, which is nobody should ever try to do. I took basic, which was pretty simple, a good way to get an idea of how to program. I had a little bit of COBOL, which I thought was stupid because the first thing you have to do is tell the program who it is. If the program doesn't know who it is, why does it need me? Why would I? But it's useful. They're still using COBOL, I understand. There's RPG, Fortran. My Fortran class was really interesting because we used the old card punch. You remember the card punches? So code might be several hundred lines of code. Would be, even for a simple program. And each line of code was a card. And we had to take that stack of cards up to a window, and one of the students or somebody would run that through a machine and do a printout and test it to see if it would do what you ask it to do or not. What happened if 1 or 2 of those cards was wrong? Didn't work. What happened if you dropped that stack of cards on the way to the window? That has happened. We have more modern languages today, and I'm sure I don't even know what they're using today. It's gone completely beyond me, but I know a little bit about C++ and Java, and I understand Apple has a program called Swift now that some of you may know about. And I'm sure that there are many proprietary and much more advanced languages than that. But my point is that with a computer, nothing happens until it is programmed, and the programming is code. It is line after line after line after line after line, and one mistake doesn't make the program better. It makes it stop. Well, guess what? We've got a computer in us, created in us. It's called DNA. DNA is just unbelievably complex. And it's code. It is a programmed code. At the core of every human lies the genetic code, DNA, a complex sequence that dictates physical traits, susceptibilities, diseases, aspects of our personality, among many other things. Everything about your body is controlled by code built into a DNA molecule. This biological programming is remarkably similar to computer code, which consists of instructions that guide computer operations. Both systems rely on a language of codes, nucleotide sequences in DNA, and binary code in computers to execute complex processes from creating life to running software. At the molecular level, DNA's complexity arises from its hierarchical organization and functional versatility. Its primary structure, the linear sequence of nucleotide bases, encoded genetic instructions in a digital-like format. When I do a program in COBOL, I screw up one line. What happens? It doesn't work. That's what would happen in DNA also. DNA doesn't mutate to something better, it mutates to something worse. Secondary structure, the double helix configuration is stabilized by base stacking interactions, hydrogen bonding, and hydrophobic effects, ensuring structural integrity. The tertiary structure, DNA, is further compacted by supercoiling and histone protein interactions forming chromatin in eukaryotic, and I'll probably mispronounce that, cells. This hierarchical packaging allows meters-long DNA molecules to fit within micrometer scale nuclei. And then there's the quaternary organization. Higher order chromatin structures enable dynamic regulations of gene expression, replication, and repair influenced by epigenetic modifications such as DNA, methylation, histone modifications. Are you with me so far? You got all that? Functionally, DNA's complexity extends beyond its structure, and I haven't put all the details in on this, but there's the replication fidelity, there's the regulatory elements of it, there's the genomic plasticity of it, and then there's the repair mechanism. In the repair mechanism, DNA damage repair systems, including nucleotide excision repair, homologous recombination, maintaining genomic stability. In short, it is the most sophisticated biomolecule known to science. It's what makes all life do what all life does. If stretched out, each DNA molecule in a human body is about 6 feet long. There are trillions of DNA cells in your body. And you can see various different numbers, 10 trillion, whoever you go to has a little different estimate of how many trillion you've got in you. If it were stretched out end to end, it would be about 3.85 billion miles, which is more than 41 times the distance between Earth and the sun. That's all in your body. And it's all coded. I'm not sure what language God uses. And yet, there's no evidence of design. much less the designer. It all happened by accident. And if you believe that, I've got some oceanfront property in Oklahoma I'd like to sell you. Just think of the faith it takes to be an atheist. Fantastic. Anything anybody wants to add to that? I just find it unbelievably remarkable. Irreducible complexity. And just like when you screw up a program in COBOL or RPG, it stops working. It doesn't get better. It doesn't evolve into something new. It just stops. That's what happens with DNA. All right, back to our text. We are in Tuesday. We are in a period of confrontation with the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees. And Jesus is in overdrive mode to get his disciples ready for what's coming. Everything is designed to teach them. He's going to talk now about the parable of the wicked tenets. And I'm using here Mark 12 simply because that's what LaGard Smith used, but you can find it in other Gospels as well. Jesus then began to speak to them in parables. A man, in this case, the man is God, planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for it, a wine press, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard out to some farmers. And the farmers are the priests and the scribes and the Pharisees. And he moved to another place. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard, but they seized him and beat him. And there are many examples of this. I just put Jeremiah 20, and sent them away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them, and they struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and that one they killed. And they're, for example, Isaiah, as an example of a prophet who was killed. He sent many others. Some of them they beat, others they stoned. Zechariah, for example. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, "They will respect my son." But the tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they grabbed him, dragged him out of the vineyard, and murdered him. The analogy here, the metaphor here is blatant and open and unmistakable. Jesus is talking about the religious leaders, the Jewish religious leaders, over history, all the way back to the time of the prophets. And he's talking now about what's going to happen to him, God's son. He's going to be dragged out of the vineyard, an allusion to Hebrews 13, where Jesus was killed outside the gates. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill these tenants and give the vineyard to others. Who are the others? That's us. That's the Gentiles. When the people heard this, they said, "God forbid, may this never be." Because of their rebellion, the vineyard, God's kingdom, will be taken from them, the Jewish hierarchy, the leaders, the priests, the rabbis, the scribes and the Pharisees, given to others, the Gentiles, the faithful believers, not just Gentiles, but the faithful believers. Many Jews fall into that category. And I think maybe, and you can take issue with this, but I think when he's talking about them being killed, there may be the shadowing of AD 70. The destruction of Jerusalem is on its way. It's coming. And Jesus will drive the point home. Parable warns against rejecting God's authority and reminds us that God's patience has limits. And he'll drive the point home by quoting to them on that occasion Psalm 118, particularly verse 22. Any other thoughts on the Wicked Tenets? I just kind of breezed through that quickly. We had begun a little of it last week, and I just wanted to finish that up a little bit this morning. Anything that anybody wanted to add to the Wicked Tenets? I think it's one of the metaphors that is just really in your face obvious. And I know that those Jewish leaders who heard it fully understood it. They knew it. They knew he was talking about them, and it didn't make them happy. So in Matthew 21, Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the scriptures?" And how many times has he said this now, just in these last couple of chapters? And every time he says it, it's a slap in the face, right? These are guys that have memorized Torah, memorized the writings, memorized the prophets, what we call the Old Testament. And Jesus says, haven't you ever even read it? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Cornerstone. The verb in the Greek implies that the stone was first examined. The word rejected, when Christ said that you have rejected it, he meant not just that you dismissed it, but that you have examined it, you have considered it, you have deliberately refused it after examination. Did you have something, David? In ancient architecture, the cornerstone was the first and most important stone. It was laid in the building's foundation. It had two primary purposes. It formed a foundation and stability. It provided the strength and the support for the rest of the building. It provided an alignment and unity. Everything was aligned with it. It ensured that the structure would be stable and properly shaped. Again, a metaphor that is, there's nothing deep or secret about it. Obviously, he's talking about Jesus as being the cornerstone of his coming ecclesia. Psalms 118:20, we mentioned before, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is wonderful to see. Isaiah 28:16, I am laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. The one who relies on it will never be shaken. Clearly messianic prophecy. And we have already mentioned Matthew 21. Jesus quotes Psalm 118. Acts 4, this is Peter. Then Jesus, as the stone that you builders rejected, has now become the cornerstone. And then Paul in Ephesians 2, together we are his house, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, and the cornerstone is Christ Jesus himself. So there's nothing left to guess about or wonder about what was intended. It's a very strong illustration of the role that Jesus has in establishing his ecclesia, making it strong, making it straight, making it accurate. 1 Peter 2, you are coming to Christ, who is a living cornerstone of God's temple. He was rejected by people, but he was chosen by God for great honor. As the scriptures say, I am placing a cornerstone in Jerusalem, chosen for great honor, and anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. It kind of caught wings, didn't it? Everybody wanted to use the illustration of the cornerstone because it so beautifully illustrates the role of Jesus and the coming kingdom. So what do we learn from the cornerstone, among other things? Jesus is the one true foundation. Building on anything other than Jesus is going to fail. Like the cornerstone, Jesus aligns us with God's purpose. He unites the ecclesia. And rejecting Jesus means spiritual collapse. I don't know if cornerstones have any relevance in construction today or not, but they certainly were in the first century. Some of you builders, we don't use cornerstones anymore, do we? I don't know. I'm not a builder.
I think it depends. I think it depends. I was a part of building a new fire and EMS station, and they laid a cornerstone, but they did the masons came and did a symbolic cornerstone on there, but they do some, but not a lot.
So whether or not it's functional, it still has
Right. To show that it is a
right.
cornerstone.
It has a symbolic reference. That would make sense, yeah. Anything else that you think of that would be implied in the cornerstone that we haven't talked about? Going on, Matthew 21. Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit. You didn't produce its fruit, so you're going to be like that withered fig tree. Anyone who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. Aramaic Bible says, and whoever falls on the stone will be shattered, and it will pulverize to dust anyone upon whom it will fall. That's a little less apparent figure of speech, the way it's used here. I don't know why a cornerstone would fall on someone. Some commentators have tried to refer to what's the stone in the middle of the arch? Is it the keystone? Is that, what is it called? I forgot. Capstone, right? The capstone goes right in the middle of the arch and holds it together. And of course, if it fell on you, it certainly would pulverize you. But anyway, the message is clear, whether the illustration demonstrates it very clearly or not. Crushing stones. That would be a figure that the Jewish people would be very familiar with, right? This was the prescribed method of execution for the Jews. 2 Kings 24, Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue, you remember that? Was crushed by a stone. The Jewish method of execution, of course, was by stoning, and I don't know if we have fully appreciated the horror, the horror of the stoning. Just a little description of what Jewish stoning looked like. The place of stoning was 2 men's heights. In other words, they put you in a pit of maybe 10 feet, 10, 12 feet. One of the witnesses, if you bore witness against somebody, you had to follow through. You weren't exempt from the punishment. You were a participant in the punishment. But one of the witnesses struck him on his loins to throw him down into the pit. If he died, well, that was it. You were done. If not, they took a stone which lay there and was as much as 2 men could carry, and cast it with all their might upon his breast. If that took care of it, you were done. If not, well, then everybody would pick up a rock, not a pebble, but a rock, a big rock, and they would finish off the job. So it wasn't a very clean and easy way of execution, just in case you were contemplating that. So when he talks about the cornerstone crushing you, they would understand the metaphor that he was talking about. It would make sense to them. And they might shudder just a little bit. So in verse 45, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard Jesus' parables, they knew he was talking about them. No kidding. It would have really been hard to miss, wouldn't it? They looked for a way to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowd because the people held that he was a prophet. Then we come to the next parable, which is the parable of the wedding banquet. And in the parable of the wedding banquet, Jesus is the groom, and the church, the ecclesia, is the bride. This, the idea of the wedding banquet is a recurring theme in Christian scripture. Matthew 9, John 3, 2 Corinthians, Ephesians, and all the way into Revelation, we have this reoccurring idea of the wedding banquet used in various iterations of that. Here in Matthew 22, Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king," your God, "who prepared a wedding banquet for his son," who would be talking about Jesus. "He sent his servants," these would be the prophets, "to those who had been invited to the banquet," that would be the Jewish people and the Jewish leaders, "to tell them to come, but they refused to come." Same story, isn't it? It's just a new parable, telling it in a little different way. Then he sent some more servants and said, "Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened calves have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet." But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. Again, referring to the persistent denial, refusal to hear the prophets and to hear the messengers of God over decades and centuries, literally. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The prophets invited, and for their efforts, they were stoned and sawed in half and murdered in various and sundry ways. The king was enraged. He sent his army or his troops. I'm not sure who the reference is here to. Maybe Rome in AD 70, maybe the angels in final judgment. Anyway, the king was enraged. He sent his army, or maybe all of that, maybe all of the above, and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Certainly, the burning of the city would be a direct reference to AD 70, would it not, where the city was completely destroyed and burned. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited, the Jews, especially the Jewish leaders, they did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find." The street corners would have been where the larger crowds of people were gathered. Go bring them in, all of them. So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But the king came in to see the guests, and he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, "How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?" Incidentally, the word friend there in Greek is not a friendly kind of word. And the man was speechless. Now this is a conundrum. David, Jeff wants to say something. Why would he be angry with somebody that he had just pulled in out of the yard? Go ahead, Jeff.
What you said is they ought to be treat everybody as they should, and they should. When you said that, they always 22:10 said they ought to have all the cleansing,
Yes.
and treat everybody as they should, and
Absolutely.
be nice.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Very good.
And I'm reading it from the Bible.
Yes, sir. That's good.
On top of that.
Good for you. It's a good place to read it from. Okay, think about the picture now. He sent his servants out to the street corner where everybody is gathered. And he said, "Come on." He didn't say, "Go home, get ready." He said, "Come on." Here they are. They're all gathered in here at the banquet. And now the master of the banquet comes in. And he looks at you and says, "You don't have on wedding garments. What's wrong with you? How dare you?" And what do you say? Well, nothing. You're speechless. What I would say is, well, I didn't have time to go get them. I didn't get an invitation a month ago and have time to prepare for this. You just brought me in. How can you be mad at me? Right? What right did he have to be mad at anybody? That's not fair. Why was it okay, David? David's going to explain this to me because it's a conundrum.
My only thought on that is that the garments should have been provided. And
The magic word.
That person actually, for whatever reason, failed to or refused to put them on.
Absolutely. Then the king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot, throw him outside into darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are invited but few are chosen." This guy's mad. He's not happy at all. Does he have a right to be? In many cultures, and I'm sure that this is the case that Jesus is relaying in this parable, it was common for the wedding host to provide the wedding garments to all the guests. And for you to refuse that, then it becomes on you. It's not on the bridegroom. It's not on the head of the feast. It's on you. You have blatantly disrespected your host in something that you were perfectly capable of being in compliance. Zephaniah 1:7-8 says, "Be silent before the sovereign Lord, for the day of the Lord is near. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He has concentrated those he has invited. On the day of the Lord's sacrifice, I will punish the officials and the king's sons and all those clad in foreign clothes." I'm going to provide the clothes for you, but if you refuse them, it's on you. Now it makes sense, doesn't it? Now it fits into the message.
In my mind, it goes past the garment. It goes to the whole mindset.
That's it.
I'm invited into your house. You set the rules, not me. But that guy came in and said, "I'll play by my own rules. I don't want to abide by what you want me to do."
But the inviter had made it so that he had no excuse.
They could comply.
All he had to do was just comply. Yeah. It wasn't like Todd.
It just reminds me that the reference to being clothed, right? Clothed with Christ. I needed clothes and you clothed me. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, things like that. The reference,
Absolutely.
I never picked up
Yeah.
on that before.
Yep. Just like in the parable, the landlord, the man in charge, has done his part. The clothing is available. The clothing is provided. It's there for the taking. And the only reason for not being clothed in Jesus Christ is because we refuse to do so, just like the Jews did. It's really a very powerful metaphor. Genesis 45:22, when Joseph and his brethren, the custom of presenting festive garments is presupposed, something they were given since they were gathered from the highways. Isaiah 61, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall be joyful in my God, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me as a bridegroom decks himself out with ornaments. The idea of providing the clothing. For us as disciples, we put on Jesus. And coming to Todd's comments, Galatians 3:27, all who have been united with Christ in baptism have what? Put on Christ like putting on new clothes. It's a beautiful metaphor. And the giver of the feast was perfectly justified in his anger and in his condemnation and in his judgment, because he had already provided the means. And it was only stubborn refusal on the part of the other. So what do we learn from the wedding banquet? Well, number one, God's invitation to salvation. The king, God, wedding feast, his kingdom. The original guests, those religious leaders who rejected Christ, and it would be the same today for those who reject Christ. It doesn't matter that you don't happen to be a Pharisee or a scribe. You can be a Houstonian and still be part of this. Invitations being extended to everyone, gospel being open to all. I think the lesson there for all of us is that rejecting God has consequences. Those who refused the invitation, mistreated the king's servants, prophets, ultimately Jesus, faced judgment. And this warns against rejecting God's call. God welcomes all, but on his terms. Does he have a right to set the terms? I think he does. This shows God's grace, but the man without a wedding garment represents someone who tried to enter on his own terms, not on God's terms. The garment symbolizes the righteousness in Christ. We cannot enter God's kingdom without spiritual transformation. And again, Isaiah 61, he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. Revelation 19:8, she has been given the finest of pure white linen to wear, for the fine linen represents the good deeds of God's holy people. Being called versus being chosen. This suggests that while God's invitation is broad, only those who respond in faith and obedience will be truly part of his kingdom. And finally, judgment and accountability. The harsh response to those who reject the invitation or do not come properly attired suggests that there are consequences for ignoring or disrespecting God's grace and invitation. God has been very gracious to invite us in off the street corners, the highways and the hedges, the byways of life. And he's made all the arrangements. He's provided all the food. He even provides the garments. But, there's always that. To disrespect that, to ignore it, there are consequences. God's sovereignty, the king exercises complete control over who attends the banquet, highlighting God's sovereignty and choosing who enters his kingdom. Who does he choose? Those who clothe themselves with the garments that he has provided. For us, those who put on his Son, Jesus Christ. And the urgency of response, the parable conveys a sense of urgency in responding to God's will. The original guest's refusal led to an immediate action to fill the banquet hall with others, indicating that opportunities to join in God's kingdom might not always be available indefinitely. He didn't wait a week or a month. He said, go get them now. Bring them in. Today is the day of salvation. All right. Well, that's a good stopping point. Any last thoughts? We have a couple of minutes. Any last thoughts on the wedding banquet? It's a powerful metaphor. And certainly it's as applicable today as it was 2,000 years ago. And I think it's as obvious and clear and undeniable today as it was then. Nothing further. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spreading out so nobody gets sick. And have a wonderful, God-blessed week.